Marcus slammed the front door so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall. "You always twist everything," he shouted from the hallway as he dragged his suitcase across the floor. His voice was loud enough for the neighbors to hear, the kind of loud that turns private arguments into public performances. I stood in the kitchen, hands resting on the counter, trying to keep my breathing steady. "I'm not twisting anything," I said quietly. "I asked a question." That's solid had been. A question about money. Marcus had always handled the finances. Bills, investments, savings. He called it his system. For years, I trusted that system because trusting him felt easier than challenging him. But lately, the numbers hadn't been adding up. Statements arriving late, transfers that didn't make sense, accounts he suddenly claimed were temporary. The more I asked, the more defensive he became. Tonight, that defensiveness exploded. "You know what?" he snapped, zipping his suitcase violently. "I'm done explaining myself to someone who doesn't even understand how money works." I watched him pace through the living room like a man who had already decided the outcome of the argument. "This marriage has been suffocating for years," he said. "Maybe leaving is the best thing that could happen." The words hung in the air between us. For a moment, I thought he might calm down, that he might stop pacing and sit down so we could actually talk like two people who had built a life together. Instead, he grabbed his laptop from the table, then his car keys, then the suitcase. He didn't look at me when he walked toward the door. "You'll see. You'll realize how much you've ruined." Then the door slammed. The silence that followed felt heavier than the argument itself. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been standing minutes earlier. Marcus had threatened to leave before. Usually he cooled off and came back later with a half-hearted apology and a promise that things would change. But this time felt different. This time he took everything with him, or at least almost everything. 2 days passed before I noticed it. The house felt strangely calm without Marcus's constant energy filling the rooms. No late-night phone calls, no impatient sighs when I asked questions. Just quiet. On the second afternoon, I was wiping down the kitchen counter when I saw it. A phone. It sat near the coffee maker like it had always belonged there. Marcus had upgraded to a new phone months earlier, but he still kept this one around sometimes. I remembered him saying it was just a backup. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. For a moment, I considered placing it in a drawer with the rest of his forgotten things. Then the screen lit up. A message appeared. Just one sentence. "I hope she still doesn't know." My chest tightened. The words sat on the screen like they had been waiting specifically for me to read them. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to convince myself it meant something harmless, but something inside me already knew better. My hands trembled as I typed the passcode. 4 numbers I had memorized years ago without trying. The phone unlocked instantly, and as the screen opened to a long thread of messages I had never seen before, one terrifying thought settled quietly into my mind. Marcus hadn't just stormed out after an argument. He had been preparing to leave for a very long time. For a long time, I didn't move. The phone rested in my hands, the message still glowing on the screen like it had a pulse of its own. I hope she still doesn't know. 4 simple words, but they carried the kind of weight that makes your stomach sink before your mind has time to catch up. I told myself to put the phone down, close the message, walk away. There are moments in life when ignorance feels safer than truth, when the mind whispers that whatever you're about to discover will change things in ways you can't undo. But curiosity has a quiet kind of courage, and something inside me needed to know. My thumb hovered over the message thread. Then I opened it. The conversation stretched back months. At first, the messages were casual. Marcus speaking to someone saved under a name I didn't recognize. A man, judging by the tone, businesslike, impatient. But as I scrolled, the casual tone disappeared. Numbers appeared, large ones. Transfers discussed in shorthand phrases that sounded almost coded. Move the rest before the paperwork starts. Make sure it doesn't show on the joint accounts. Once the divorce is filed, it's too late. My throat tightened. Divorce. The words sat there in the middle of the conversation like it had been part of the plan all along. I kept scrolling. Each message peeled back another layer of a life Marcus had apparently been living without me. There were screenshots of bank transfers, accounts I had never seen before, references to investments Marcus always told me had lost money. Except they hadn't. They had been moved, hidden, protected somewhere beyond the reach of the accounts we shared. My hands felt cold. For years, Marcus had insisted we were struggling financially, that we needed to be careful, that certain purchases were irresponsible. I remembered turning down trips with friends because he said we couldn't afford them. I remembered skipping small luxuries because we needed to save. All the while, he had been quietly moving money somewhere else, preparing for something, preparing to leave. The realization made my chest ache, not with anger yet, but with something deeper, humiliation. I had trusted him, not just with money, with our life. My fingers slid to another message thread. This one was different. The contact name was saved as just a first name, Lena. I hesitated before opening it, but hesitation had already lost the battle. The messages opened immediately. Last night was perfect. I wish I didn't have to pretend anymore. You said the divorce will be done soon. My breath caught. The conversation went back nearly a year. Photos had been exchanged, restaurants I had never heard Marcus mention, trips he told me were work conferences. And there were other names too. More conversations, more women, some flirtatious, some emotional, all of them believing Marcus was a man who was almost free. I lowered the phone slowly onto the kitchen counter. The room felt suddenly too quiet. For years, I had blamed our distance on stress, work pressure, financial problems, normal marriage struggles. But the truth sitting inside that phone told a completely different story. Marcus hadn't been drifting away. He had been living another life, and he had been planning his exit the entire time. The phone buzzed again. Another message appeared on the screen. Did she say anything yet? My heart started beating faster. Whoever was texting him clearly believed Marcus still had the phone, that he was reading these messages, that he was responding, which meant something else too. They had no idea the phone wasn't in Marcus's hands anymore. It was in mine. And suddenly, I understood something Marcus clearly hadn't considered. He thought he had left cleanly. He thought he controlled the story. But sitting on my kitchen counter was something far more powerful than an argument. It was proof, and Marcus had accidentally handed it to me. I didn't sleep that night. The phone stayed on the kitchen table, its screen going dark and lighting up again every few minutes with new notifications. Each vibration felt like a reminder that the life I thought I understood had been quietly unraveling long before Marcus slammed that door. At first, I just watched the messages appear. More conversations, more names, business partners discussing accounts I had never heard about, plans to move money before certain deadlines, jokes about how easy it had been to keep things separate. One message made my stomach twist. Once the divorce is official, she won't have access to anything. I read that line 3 times. She. Not my name, not his wife, just she, someone he had already mentally erased. For a moment, anger flashed through me so quickly it surprised me. My instinct was to call him immediately, to demand explanations, to confront him with the phone and force the truth out of him face to face. But another voice inside me stopped that impulse. It was quieter, but stronger. Marcus had been planning this for years, and if I confronted him now, all I would do was warn him that I knew, warn him that he needed to move faster, warn him that the evidence sitting in this phone was suddenly dangerous. No, confrontation could wait. Information couldn't. I plugged the phone into a charger and opened the message threads again, this time with a different mindset. I wasn't reading anymore. I was documenting. Screenshots, conversation histories, photos, account numbers, transfer confirmations, anything that looked even slightly important went into a folder on my laptop. Then I backed it up again to a cloud drive just in case. By morning, I had filled nearly 3 folders. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. Marcus hadn't just been cheating, he had been quietly relocating money for at least 2 years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, always moving them through accounts that never touched our joint finances. Accounts that wouldn't appear on the statements I occasionally glanced at. He had built a financial exit route piece by piece, and he believed I would never notice. Around noon, the phone rang. Marcus's name flashed across the screen. For a moment, I froze. If I answered, he would immediately know something was wrong. He would know the phone wasn't with him. That alone might make him suspicious. So I let it ring. It rang 5 times before stopping. Seconds later, a message appeared. "Have you seen my old phone?" My eyes lingered on the screen. Of course he had noticed. The phone contained conversations he couldn't afford for anyone else to see. I typed a response carefully. "Yeah, it's still here on the counter." 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, his reply came through. "Just leave it there. I'll grab it sometime." I leaned back in my chair slowly. Marcus thought the phone had been sitting untouched this whole time. He thought his secrets were still sealed safely behind a lock screen. He had no idea that everything inside it was already copied, already backed up, already sitting in folders that could change the entire direction of what happened next. That afternoon, I made my first call to a lawyer. Not out of revenge, not even out of anger, but because Marcus had spent years preparing to walk away with everything. And now, for the first time since he left, I understood something clearly. He had been planning his escape, but the phone he left behind had just rewritten the ending. The lawyer's office smelled like coffee and old paper. I remember that detail clearly because my mind was trying to focus on anything other than the folder sitting in my lap. Inside it were printed screenshots, messages, account numbers, transfer confirmations, photos Marcus had never meant for me to see. For years, Marcus had insisted I didn't understand finances, that money stressed me out, that it was better if he handled things. Now those same financial details were sitting in neat stacks of paper in front of a stranger who understood them perfectly. My lawyer flipped through the pages slowly, her eyes scanning each document with the calm concentration of someone who had seen this kind of thing before. "That's a lot of material," she finally said. Her voice wasn't surprised, just careful. "Did you access all of this from his phone?" she asked. "Yes." "And you still have the phone?" "It's sitting on my kitchen counter." She nodded thoughtfully, turning another page. "These conversations about transferring money, did you know about these accounts before?" "No," I said quietly. I watched her underline a few sections with a pen. "This," she said, tapping one screenshot, "is a discussion about moving funds before divorce filing." She looked up at me. "That tells me 2 things." "What?" I asked. "First, He expected a divorce long before the argument you described. That didn't surprise me anymore. And second, she continued, he was trying to protect assets from being divided. My stomach tightened. Is that illegal? Sometimes, she said calmly, but more importantly, it's something courts take very seriously. She slid the documents back toward me. You did the right thing by documenting everything before confronting him. That sentence felt strangely validating because the truth was, I'd spent the past 2 days wondering if I was doing something wrong by staying quiet. But hearing her say that made something inside me settle. Don't contact him about the phone yet. Why? Because right now, she said, he believes you haven't looked at it. She leaned back slightly. That's an advantage. I thought about Marcus's text from earlier. Just leave it there. I'll grab it sometime. He sounded relaxed, confident. The same confidence he probably carried with him into every secret meeting, every hidden account transfer, every conversation where he talked about leaving me with nothing. What happens next? I asked. We gather more information, she said. She opened a legal pad and started writing. Bank records, property records, business partnerships, anything tied to those conversations. She paused, and when the legal process begins, her pen stopped moving. Then the evidence appears. The simplicity of that sentence was almost chilling. No dramatic confrontation, no emotional showdown, just facts. Later that afternoon, I returned home and sat at the kitchen table. The phone was still there, exactly where I had left it. Marcus hadn't come to get it. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he didn't want to risk another argument. Or maybe he was simply confident that whatever secrets lived inside that device were still safe. I picked it up again and opened the messages. This time I wasn't nervous. I was methodical, because now I understood something Marcus clearly didn't. This phone wasn't just evidence of cheating. It was a map of every lie he had told, every account he thought was hidden, every plan he believed was invisible, and soon every one of those plans was going to walk into a courtroom with me. Marcus thought he had already escaped, but the phone he left behind had just quietly locked the door behind him. The strangest part of those next few weeks was how normal everything looked from the outside. The sun still came through the kitchen window every morning. The neighbors still walked their dogs at the same time every evening. Grocery stores stayed busy. Traffic lights changed on schedule. Life continued. But inside my house, inside my mind, everything had shifted. Every day after work, I sat at the kitchen table with Marcus's phone and my laptop. The routine became almost mechanical. Open the messages, scroll, screenshot, save, label, back up. The lawyer had explained something important during our meeting. The strongest cases aren't built on dramatic revelations, they're built on patterns. And Marcus had left behind years of patterns. The financial messages were the most revealing. There were long threads between Marcus and 2 men who appeared to be business partners. Their conversations read like careful strategies written in shorthand. Transfer in stages. Don't touch the joint account. Move the last portion before filing. I learned more about Marcus's finances in 3 nights than I had in our entire marriage. There were investment accounts, offshore transfers, a second property listed under an LLC I had never heard of, all of it carefully separated from the accounts we supposedly shared. But the messages with other women told a different story. They weren't cautious, they were careless. Marcus had told them he was almost divorced. He had told them he was trapped in a miserable marriage. He had told them that he was trying to protect his assets from someone who didn't deserve them. That last sentence made my jaw tighten. Someone who didn't deserve them. The house we bought together? The years I worked while he built his business? The nights I stayed awake helping him prepare presentations when he said he was overwhelmed? Apparently, none of that counted. One night, around midnight, another message came through, this time from Lena. "Did you move the rest of the money yet?" I stared at the screen. Marcus still hadn't picked up the phone, which meant whoever he was working with assumed he was reading these messages. Another message followed. "You said it had to be done before she files anything." I leaned back in my chair slowly. Marcus wasn't just hiding money, he was racing against a timeline he assumed I knew nothing about. The phone buzzed again. Marcus. My heart jumped slightly when his name appeared. I answered this time. "Hey," he said casually. His voice sounded almost relaxed. "Hey," I replied. "Did you leave the phone where it was?" "Yes." "Good," he said quickly. "I'll swing by tomorrow and grab it." I looked down at the device in my hand, the same phone that now held copies of nearly every lie he had told. "Okay," I said. There was a pause. "You doing all right?" he asked. The question almost made me laugh. "Yeah," I said evenly. "I'm fine." "Good," he replied. "This whole thing will settle down soon." Settle down? Marcus still believed the argument had been the center of everything. He thought the worst part of this situation was already behind him. He had no idea the real storm hadn't even started yet. After we hung up, I backed up the files one more time. 3 separate locations now held copies of the evidence: laptop, cloud storage, external drive. Marcus could take the phone back tomorrow. It didn't matter anymore, because everything that mattered had already been saved. And as I shut the laptop and looked at the quiet kitchen around me, one thought kept circling through my mind. Marcus believed he was coming tomorrow to collect his property, but what he was really doing was walking back into a story he no longer controlled. Marcus showed up the next afternoon like nothing had happened. I saw his car pull into the driveway through the living room window. My stomach tightened automatically, the way it used to whenever I knew an uncomfortable conversation was coming. But this time felt different. Not because the tension was gone, because the balance had shifted. When Marcus knocked, it was quick and casual, 2 taps on the door like he was picking up a package. I opened it. He looked the same jacket, same impatient posture, same confident expression he wore whenever he believed he had the upper hand in a situation. "Hey," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Hey." His eyes moved around the room quickly, scanning the space the way people do when they're checking for signs of trouble. Everything looked exactly as it had 2 days ago. Clean counters, quiet house, nothing out of place. "Phone still on the counter?" he asked. "Yeah." I walked into the kitchen and he followed. The phone sat exactly where it had been sitting for 2 days. Marcus picked it up quickly. I watched him carefully. The first thing he did was check the screen, then the message notifications. Then he opened a conversation thread. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Good, he probably thought. Untouched, safe. He slipped the phone into his jacket pocket like he was reclaiming something valuable. "Thanks," he said. "I didn't realize I left it." "No problem." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was different now. Marcus thought it was the awkward silence of 2 people after a fight, but I knew something he didn't. Every message inside that phone already existed somewhere else. "Listen," Marcus said suddenly. His voice softened just enough to sound reasonable. "This whole situation got out of hand the other night." I leaned against the counter. "Did it?" "Yeah," he said quickly. "I think we both said things we didn't mean." I studied his face. Marcus had always been good at sounding sincere when it suited him, but now every word he said felt like it belonged to a stranger. "What happens now?" I asked. He shrugged slightly. "We cool off, figure things out." Figure things out. the same vague phrase he always used when he wanted time to rearrange something behind the scenes. "You're not thinking about divorce, are you?" he asked carefully. The question almost made my chest tighten. Not because of fear, because of the irony. Marcus had been planning divorce for years. The messages on that phone proved it. But now he was asking the question like the idea had never crossed his mind. "I don't know," I said. He nodded slowly, as if that answer made sense. "Good," he said. "We shouldn't rush into anything." Of course not, because Marcus still believed he was the only one preparing. He walked toward the door. "I'll call you later," he said. Then he paused. "Try not to stress about the money stuff," he added casually. "I've got everything under control." I watched him walk down the driveway and get into his car. When the engine started, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Marcus drove away believing his secrets were safe, believing the phone he carried in his pocket still protected him, believing the future would unfold exactly the way he had planned. But what he didn't realize was that the most important thing that phone contained was no longer inside it. And the day the legal papers were filed, Marcus was going to discover that the story he thought he controlled had already been rewritten. The next few weeks passed quietly. So quietly that Marcus probably believed everything had returned to normal. We spoke occasionally on the phone, short conversations, polite ones, the kind people have when they're pretending things are temporary. Marcus sounded relaxed every time, confident. Sometimes he even joked. "You still overthinking everything?" he asked during one call. I smiled slightly, even though he couldn't see it. "No," I said calmly, "not really." And that was the truth. For the first time in years, I wasn't overthinking. I was preparing. Every few days, I met with my lawyer. Each meeting added another piece to the picture Marcus had been trying to hide. The phone messages led to bank records. The bank records led to business filings. The business filings revealed the second property. And the second property revealed something Marcus probably never expected anyone to discover. A shell company, registered under one of his business partners' names. But the financial trail still pointed back to Marcus. Money moving through multiple accounts, small transfers designed to avoid attention, large ones appearing right before certain conversations in the messages. My lawyer leaned back in her chair during one meeting and shook her head slightly. "He wasn't careful," she said. "He thought he was," I replied. "Yes," she said, "that's usually the problem." She turned her laptop screen toward me. "This account alone holds more than your entire joint savings." I stared at the number. For years, Marcus had insisted we were struggling, that the business had bad years, that investments had failed. But the truth was sitting right there in black and white. He hadn't been losing money. He had been hiding it, and not just from me, from the legal process he knew was coming. "Can they still access this?" I asked quietly. "Not for long," my lawyer said. She tapped a few keys on the laptop. "Once the filings begin, financial disclosure becomes mandatory." Meaning? Meaning, if he fails to report these accounts, she let the sentence hang, he'll be explaining that to a judge. That night, I sat alone in the living room thinking about everything that had happened. Marcus had spent years building his escape. Every secret account, every hidden transfer, every lie about struggling finances. He thought he was protecting himself, but what he had actually done was leave a trail. And that trail began with one simple mistake: the phone he left on the kitchen counter. A week later, the official divorce filing was submitted. Marcus called me the same afternoon. His voice sounded different this time, less confident. "Did you file something?" he asked carefully. "Yes." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Well," he said finally, "we'll just handle it like adults." Handle it like adults. Marcus still believed this was a negotiation. He still believed the version of our finances he had created would be the one the court saw. But somewhere in a folder on my lawyer's desk sat hundreds of pages of evidence, messages, account numbers, transfer records, plans Marcus had written in his own words, and soon every one of those documents would be sitting in a courtroom right in front of him. For the first time since he walked out of the house, Marcus sounded uncertain. "Don't worry," he said, "this will be straightforward." I hung up the phone slowly, because I knew something he didn't. The hearing was coming, and when Marcus walked into that courtroom believing he still controlled the story, the truth waiting there was going to dismantle it piece by piece. The weeks leading up to the hearing felt strangely quiet. Marcus acted like everything was routine. Every conversation we had stayed calm, almost polite. He asked about small things, mail that arrived at the house, whether I'd moved anything from the garage, whether the utility bills were still being paid. Nothing about the accounts, nothing about the messages, nothing about the life he had built behind my back. That silence told me everything I needed to know. Marcus believed his secrets were still safe. Meanwhile, my lawyer and I continued preparing. Each meeting added another layer to the story Marcus thought only he understood. Bank statements confirmed transfers that matched the message timestamps. Property records connected him to the second home I had never seen. Corporate filings tied his name quietly to the shell company we had discovered. Every document strengthened the same conclusion. Marcus hadn't just been dishonest, he had been deliberately hiding assets from the marriage for years. One afternoon, my lawyer spread several documents across her desk. "This," she said, pointing to one account summary, "is going to be important." The number printed at the bottom of the page made my breath catch. It was more money than Marcus had ever admitted to having, more money than our entire joint savings had ever held. "For years, he told me the business was struggling," I said quietly. "That's what people say when they're moving money," she replied. She slid another document toward me. This account transfer happened 2 days before the argument where he left. I recognized the date immediately. The night he stormed out. The night he accused me of ruining everything. The night he walked away believing he had already secured his future. My lawyer leaned back in her chair. "When the court asks for financial disclosure, he's required to report every asset tied to his name. And if he doesn't?" She gave a small shrug. "Then the judge will want to know why." That evening, I received a message from Marcus. "We'll get through this without making things messy." Messy? Marcus still believed this process would follow the version of reality he had created, the one where his finances were limited, the one where our shared accounts told the entire story. He had no idea how much information had already been uncovered. The day before the hearing, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what was coming. For weeks, Marcus had been walking around confident that the legal process would protect him, confident that the truth lived only inside that phone he had taken back. But the truth wasn't in that phone anymore. It was in bank records, in legal filings, in evidence waiting patiently inside a courtroom folder. The next morning, I arrived early. The courthouse hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before something important happens. When Marcus walked in 20 minutes later, he looked exactly the way he always had, confident, relaxed, certain he understood the situation better than anyone else. He even smiled when he saw me. "Morning," he said casually. "Morning." He adjusted his jacket and glanced around the room like someone preparing for a routine meeting. Marcus believed this hearing was just the first step in a straightforward divorce. What he didn't realize was that sitting inside my lawyer's folder were documents that would expose every plan he had made, every hidden account, every lie about money, and every message he thought had disappeared the moment he took that phone back. The hearing hadn't even started yet, but Marcus had already walked into a room where the truth was waiting for him. Courtrooms are quieter than people expect. There's no dramatic music, no sudden shouting, just the soft rustle of papers, the scrape of chairs, and the steady voices of people who deal in facts instead of emotion. Marcus sat across the room from me, leaning back slightly in his chair like someone attending a routine business meeting. He looked calm, too calm. His lawyer flipped through a thin folder, whispering something to him. Marcus nodded a few times, the same confident nod he used whenever he believed he had already solved a problem. For a moment, I almost wondered if he truly believed he would walk out of that room untouched. Then the hearing began. The judge asked a few opening questions, simple ones, names, dates, basic information about the marriage. Marcus answered smoothly. Years of running his own business had made him comfortable speaking in rooms like this. He sounded reasonable, polite, cooperative. Then the conversation turned to finances. His lawyer presented the numbers Marcus had already submitted, joint savings accounts, a few business earnings, nothing unusual, nothing impressive, and certainly nothing close to the amounts we had discovered. Marcus sat there looking relaxed, like a man who had carefully arranged every detail of the story. Then my lawyer stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She simply walked to the front of the room and placed a stack of documents on the table. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we would like to introduce additional financial records that were not included in the initial disclosure." Marcus's expression shifted slightly. Not panic, just curiosity. My lawyer opened the folder. The first document appeared on the screen behind the judge. A bank statement. Not one Marcus had mentioned, not one listed in his financial disclosure. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Marcus," she said, "is this account yours?" Marcus leaned forward. For the first time that morning, he looked confused. "I don't believe so," he said carefully. My lawyer clicked to the next page. Another statement. Same account, different month. And there it was. Marcus's name, his social security number, his signature. The room went completely quiet. Marcus stared at the screen longer this time. Then he looked at his lawyer. His lawyer leaned closer to him, whispering quickly. My lawyer spoke again. "We also have records connecting this account to a second property purchased through an LLC." Another document appeared. Property records, transfer logs, dates that match the messages from the phone. Marcus's posture changed. The relaxed confidence he walked in with began slipping away piece by piece. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Marcus," she said, "these accounts were not disclosed in your financial statement." Marcus cleared his throat. "I may have misunderstood the reporting requirements." It was the same tone he used during our marriage whenever he tried to explain away something uncomfortable. But this wasn't our living room. This was a courtroom, and facts carried more weight than explanations. My lawyer clicked again. This time the screen showed something different. A screenshot. A message thread. Marcus's own words. "Move the rest before the divorce filing." The judge read the message carefully. Then she looked directly at Marcus. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. Marcus didn't look confident anymore. He didn't look relaxed. For the first time since he walked into that courtroom, Marcus looked exactly like what he had become. A man who had just realized the story he planned to tell was falling apart in real time, and the hearing wasn't even over yet. The moment the messages appeared on the screen, the room shifted. It wasn't loud. No one gasped. No one raised their voice. But something in the air changed. Marcus saw it too. I watched the realization move across his face slowly, like someone finally recognizing a problem that had been invisible moments before. The screenshot remained on the screen behind the judge. "Move the rest before the divorce filing." Marcus's own words. His lawyer leaned toward him again, whispering urgently. Marcus listened, but his eyes stayed fixed on the screen. For the first time since the hearing began, he didn't look confident. He looked trapped. The judge turned another page in the evidence packet. These messages appear to reference financial transfers that were not disclosed in your statement, she said. Marcus cleared his throat. I don't recall the context of those messages, he said carefully. The excuse sounded thin even before the judge responded. My lawyer stepped forward again. We have the transfer records that correspond with those conversations, she said. Another document appeared on the screen. Dates, amounts, account numbers. The same transactions Marcus had been discussing in the messages. The same ones he believed had disappeared the moment he took his phone back from the kitchen counter. The judge studied the screen silently. Then she looked back at Marcus. Mr. Marcus, she said, the court requires complete financial disclosure in divorce proceedings. Marcus nodded quickly. Of course. Failing to disclose assets, she continued, is considered a serious matter. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, signaling him not to speak. But Marcus spoke anyway. These accounts were related to business investments, he said quickly. They weren't personal funds. My lawyer responded immediately. Then perhaps Mr. Marcus can explain why the transfers were discussed in relation to the divorce filing. Another screenshot appeared, this one from a different conversation thread. Once the divorce is done, she won't have access. The courtroom fell silent again. Marcus looked at the screen, then at his lawyer, then at the judge. But this time there was no confident explanation waiting. The story he had carefully constructed was unraveling faster than he could adjust it. The judge closed the file in front of her. Mr. Marcus, she said calmly, these matters will require further review. Marcus nodded stiffly. His shoulders had lost their earlier confidence. The hearing continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome had already shifted. Additional financial investigations were ordered. Asset disclosures were expanded. Deadlines were established. By the time the judge finished speaking, Marcus no longer looked like a man managing a routine divorce. He looked like someone realizing that years of carefully hidden decisions were now sitting under a microscope. When the hearing ended, people began gathering their papers. Marcus remained seated for a moment. Then he stood slowly. For the first time since he walked into the courthouse that morning, he looked at me directly. Not angry, not confident, just stunned. He finally understood something that had been true for weeks. The phone he left behind had already told the entire story, and there was no way to put that story back into his pocket. When the courtroom began to empty, Marcus still hadn't moved. People walked past him quietly, lawyers gathering their folders, clerks stacking documents, the low hum of normal courthouse activity returning like nothing extraordinary had just happened. But Marcus sat there staring at the table in front of him. For the first time since I had known him, he looked unsure of what to do next. Eventually, his lawyer leaned toward him again, speaking in a low voice. Marcus nodded slowly, the kind of nod someone gives when they're absorbing information they don't want to hear. They both stood. As they walked toward the exit, Marcus glanced at me again. This time, there was something different in his expression. Recognition, not of the evidence, of the mistake. Because in that moment, he finally understood exactly where everything had started to fall apart. Not in the courtroom, not in the divorce filing, but on a quiet kitchen counter weeks earlier. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with movement. Marcus caught up to me just as I reached the elevator. "Did you go through my phone?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired. I looked at him. Yes. He exhaled slowly. "I thought I grabbed everything," he said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Marcus had always been the type of man who believed preparation guaranteed control. He believed if he planned carefully enough, anticipated every detail, accounted for every risk, then the outcome would always land in his favor. But control has a weakness. It depends on perfection, and perfection rarely survives small mistakes. "You could have just asked me," he said quietly. The sentence almost made me laugh. For years, I had asked him questions about money, about accounts, about decisions that didn't make sense. Every time, the answers had been vague, dismissive, or simply untrue. "I did ask," I said. Marcus didn't respond. The elevator doors opened. We stepped inside along with two other people who didn't know us and didn't care about the conversation happening between us. Marcus stared straight ahead at the floor numbers lighting up. "Everything's going to come out now," he muttered. "Yes," I said. When the elevator reached the ground floor, we stepped out together. For a brief moment, we stood in the courthouse lobby, two people whose lives had been connected for years, now standing on opposite sides of a story that had finally reached the light. Marcus adjusted his jacket. "I didn't think you'd look through it," he admitted. That sentence stayed with me, not because it hurt, but because it explained everything. Marcus had never been afraid of being caught. He was confident I would never look closely enough to find the truth. Outside the courthouse, Marcus walked toward the parking lot without another word. I watched him go, not with anger, not even with satisfaction, just with clarity. Because the hardest part of the process wasn't exposing the lies. It was understanding how easily they had lived in the shadows, and all it had taken to bring them into the light was one forgotten phone. The weeks after the hearing moved slowly, but the direction was clear. Court orders went out. Financial investigators reviewed the accounts Marcus had tried to hide. Property records were re-examined, and every document connected back to the same place, the conversations he had written himself. Marcus didn't call much after that day. When he did, the conversations were brief and careful. The confidence that once filled his voice had been replaced with something quieter. Caution. Because the version of the story he had planned to tell was no longer the one anyone believed. The investigations confirmed what the messages had already suggested. The second property was tied directly to Marcus. The shell company had been used to move money between accounts, and the funds he had attempted to relocate before the divorce filing were now included in the financial settlement. Every plan he had written in those messages had become evidence. The process took months, but the outcome was simple. The assets were divided, the hidden accounts were exposed, and the story Marcus had built around his struggling finances disappeared completely. The day everything was finalized, I walked back into the same house where the entire truth had begun to unfold. The kitchen looked exactly the same. Same counters, same coffee maker, same window that let afternoon sunlight fall across the table. But the space felt different. Not because Marcus was gone, because the silence in the house no longer felt uncertain. It felt peaceful. I stood at the counter for a moment, remembering the day I first noticed the phone sitting there. It hadn't looked important, just another object someone had forgotten during an argument. But sometimes the most powerful turning points in life don't arrive dramatically. Sometimes they appear quietly, waiting. The truth in that phone hadn't needed chasing. It had simply been sitting there, patient. The last thing Marcus said to me before the final paperwork was signed was something I still think about sometimes. I never thought something that small would ruin everything. But the phone hadn't ruined anything. Marcus had already done that himself. The phone had simply told the truth, and the truth has a strange way of finding its moment. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I'd truly love to know.